Okay, listen, I know it's usually a bad idea when you reacquire old players that used to play for you, but this time it might be different, and I'll tell you why on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day, every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. We're talking about defensemen today. We're back on our UFA free agent. I'm not going to call it a frenzy because I know that we've quite reached that yet, but we're going to look at another player who I think the Blue Jackets could and also maybe should bring in on July 1st. And Blue Jackets fans, very familiar with him. The Blue Jackets organization, very familiar with him. We're going to talk about Vladislav Gavrikov today. Former Blue Jacket, was here for most of 3 seasons, traded to LA at the deadline, and has played very well there for the LA Kings. Is now a UFA. So Blue Jackets need defensemen. I know. Again, Don Waddell is being frustratingly closed-mouthed on the whole thing, in that, not closed-mouthed, but he's saying a lot of different things, right? So no one really knows what's happening. He wants to retool the defense, but he also wants to re-sign Provorov and Fabro. So I don't know how you can kind of reconcile those two things unless you fire Severson and Gabranson into the sun, right? Because if you re-sign both Fabro and Provorov, then you're just running back the same defense that you had last season, and that's not how retooling works. Anyway, personally, I have been a huge Gavrikov fan for a long time. I think he is one of the more underrated defensive defensemen in the league. I don't think he's a Jacob Slavin type, but he is extremely, extremely good. We're going to get into his stats in a minute here, but he is, in my mind, and I think in many people's mind, exactly what this team needs. Now, I know that this team, and again, I don't know if this is confirmation bias or what, but I feel like, and I'm guilty of this as well, Blue Jackets fans, more than any other team, are we need to bring this guy back and that'll help, right? And again, I'm guilty of this as well. Who was it? Someone that was, it was Brandon Saad, I think, when he went on waivers. I was like, what if we bring Brandon Saad back? Why not? And there's a lot of talk. I made a kind of a semi tongue-in-cheek joke about doing an Elvis for Korpisalo flip with Boston. Stuff like that, right? It almost never works. But Vladislav Gavrikov was great for the Blue Jackets, has been great since he moved to LA as well. And if you can pry him out of the Los Angeles way of living that I'm sure he's become accustomed to, where, it's always sunny and you get to go to the beach every time and, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure they love it out there. But if you can bring him, quote unquote, home, that to me feels like a slam dunk, right? Obviously, there is no assurance that he will fit into Dean Everson's system. We've seen it. Jordan Harris, for example, was a player that I liked a ton, and then he came to Columbus and really didn't fit into the system and really, really struggled under Dean Everson. And that's why, he didn't really make a mark or move the needle in any way. Was a healthy scratch for a lot of the season, right? I don't think we'll see that with Gavrikov, only because he was good on a decent Blue Jackets team. He was good on a very bad Blue Jackets team. And he has been very good on a solid Kings team that admittedly has not been the best in the playoffs. But again, I feel like I'm doing that. Is it the Arrested Development meme of well, people always say that it'll work for them, but it never does. But it might for us. And I do feel a little bit like I'm doing that. But also, Vladislav Gavrikov is just a damn good defenseman, right? And I think the fact that every other team, or not every other team, but a lot of other teams are also and fans of other teams are saying, hey, we should go get this player. feels different from, hey, let's bring this old Blue Jacket home because he was great, to, hey, let's bring this good player who happened to play for us 3 years ago into the organization, right? I think that there is, again, potentially a lot to draw him here. He's familiar with the city. I think he liked the city a lot when he was here. I believe his first child was born here. I don't believe they spent the off season in North America, so that's moot. I know a lot of guys that move away from Columbus do still summer there because they love it here. But bring him into the Russian fold. And also, he's younger than I thought he was, which is not like a point specifically in favor of Gavrikov, because it's not like it's a personal achievement that he's only 29, but it feels promising. He's not 31, 32, so I think is he probably reaching the end of that window of being a really, really, really good guy? Sure, but he's not going to turn 30 and I think a lot of people look at this and be like, well, as soon as a player turns 30, they immediately die of old age or the wheels fall off or whatever. And that's simply not true. But it gives you a little bit more wiggle room than it does, signing, for example, 30-year-old Damon Severson to an 8-year contract, which I'm not going to sit here and say that it should be an 8-year contract for Gavrikov, because it shouldn't. I think it should be a much shorter contract, but I think that you can probably afford to pay him about market value or just above, because I think you offer him, 3-4 years. There's your initial partner for Denton Matejchuk. If you want to bring one of Fabro or Provorov back, again, I think people know my feelings on that. You bring Fabro back, and you have a top four of Werenski, Fabro, Matejchuk, and Gavrikov, and that's your top four. And then you figure out the bottom pairing, whether that's Severson, whoever, whether that's Gabranson, whoever. I don't care, right? Gavrikov to me feels like a slam dunk, right? He's about that age where I think he might be looking for that last contract, right? And so, if it's a case of signing him for the next 7 years, I don't think you do that, but I don't think LA might do that, honestly. And if he can sign long-term in LA, I think he'll do it. But if LA is unwilling to give him the long-term contract and he ends up going to market, I think the Columbus has enough of a sales pitch to be like, yeah, come here. We have the cap space to give you, probably a little bit more than the average team. I know that, for example, the Detroit is interested in him. Blue Jackets have double the amount of cap space as Detroit does, right? Excitingly, Puckpedia has switched over now, so it's showing all of next year's cap space instead of the playoff cap space, which is great. So it does make all of the rosters look a little bit thin. The Blue Jackets only have 11 forwards and 5 defensemen under contract right now, but it's it's much easier to look at, and then you know where you're at, because you don't have to try and figure out whether they're using last year's or this year's. Anyway, the point I'm making here is they can afford to give Vladislav Gavrikov probably a little bit more money than he's worth, because that's just how free agency works. His previous contract, I just clicked away from it, but I believe was about 5.8 for 2 years. Let me see if I can. Here it is. It was 5.875 for 2 years. If you can give Gavrikov honestly, would you? And this is me just kind of throwing numbers out there. Do you give him the Monahan contract or near enough? Do you give him 5x5 and see if that'll do? That'll take him to being about 34 years old. It gives the Blue Jackets time to develop their younger defensemen. The defensive depth has taken a hit since, obviously, Denton Matejchuk has graduated, I believe, from prospect to actual NHL player. Obviously, Juracek's not there anymore, and they were kind of they were the foundation of the Blue Jackets prospect pool for defense. 5 years gives you enough time to see, okay, is Charlie Elick ready? Is Tanner Hendricks ready? Is Stanislav Svozil going to take that next step? Is Kanatsko going to take that next step? What do they have with Damon Hunt? Like, is Jay Christensen going to take steps forward? Because again, he's still very young. He's still only about 23 or 24 years old. I don't think that there's necessarily long-term top four upside there, but bringing in a guy like Gavrikov, I think, gives you freedom to let your kids develop. Essentially, what I would do is give Gavrikov an extra million, probably an extra 2 million in an extra 2 years for what I would give Provorov, right? So you have to ask yourself, is Vladislav Gavrikov enough of an upgrade on Provorov to pay him pay the free agency tax that you're going to get, that you're going to have to pay with a guy like Gavrikov, right? So let's talk about that in just a second here at Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, like, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's super easy to lose track. But that's where Monarch Money comes in. They are your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app, though. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you can stop managing your money and start building wealth. I was on vacation week before last, so I came back from vacation and immediately didn't have the energy to do anything. Spent a lot of money on food delivery, and Monarch yelled at me for it. So that's pretty good, because now I dragged myself to the supermarket today and went to the grocery store instead of to the DoorDash app. Also great for managing money with your partner. They've made it smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for 50% off your first year. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about Vladislav Gavrikov today. Is he an upgrade on defense for the Blue Jackets? The immediate answer is yes. And I was going to compare him to Provorov here, but I realized that we haven't even really talked about just like his stats. And here's the thing about Vladislav Gavrikov is he is not going to give you points. He is not going to give you goals. He shot at 3% this season. He did not score a lot. He did not get a lot of points. He in this season had, okay, for him, pretty good. 30 points in 82 games, which is 3 points off his career high, which he hit in 21-22 with the Blue Jackets. But you're not looking at Vladislav Gavrikov for points, right? You're looking at him for defense. And Vladislav Gavrikov is one of the best defensive defensemen in the game. He is basically like, you break even with Gavrikov on offense, right? He doesn't really give you a ton, but he doesn't give up a ton either, right? He's not bad offensively. He's just not really interested in making the offense happen. Defensively, however, he would have been, my guess is, the best defensive defenseman on the Blue Jackets this season. He is extremely, extremely good at 5-on-5 defense. He's pretty good on the penalty kill as well. He will take up not all of the minutes, but a decent amount of minutes. He played about 1,500 minutes this season for the LA Kings. And in that time as well, I wrote it down. For players who played over 20 minutes a game on average, only 9 players gave up more offense. Only 9 defensemen, I should say, gave up fewer offense or less offense than Vladislav Gavrikov. Like, he just doesn't give up a ton, doesn't create a ton, but he actively stops more offense from happening to the other team, which is ideal, honestly, because the Blue Jackets, between, obviously Werenski is your driver for offense. I think we're going to see, maybe not next season, because I think we'll probably see a little bit of a slump for Matejchuk. You generally do with second-year defensemen. That's not a bad thing. But I expect next year for Matejchuk, for him to figure out the defensive side of the game a little bit more, because he was pretty good at that this season. I think that's his next step. And then I think in year 3, I think that's when you see the pop of offense. So you've got Werenski. In a couple of years, you've got Matejchuk. Dante Fabro is no slouch. Like, he's not Werenski level, but he's a really, really good partner for Werenski. I also think he's probably more offensively minded than not, right? You bring Vladislav Gavrikov in, and you're like, well, there's your defensive defenseman. There's your penalty killer. There's your guy that you send when you need to shut down. Like, you're up by a goal in the last minute of a game. That's when you send Gavrikov out, and he'll just shut it down. Like, he is an extremely, extremely accomplished defensive defenseman. And again, that's something the Blue Jackets didn't really have this season. Like, I'm going to pull up Provorov's numbers just because I feel like that's a conversation or a comparison that a lot of people are having. So I've gone to hockeyviz.com, which is Michael Blake McCurdy's advanced stats. And again, I know enough about advanced stats to make it dangerous, and I don't know exactly what the numbers mean, but Vladislav Gavrikov was +1 on offense and -10 on defense. And what that means is, I believe that means that he is 10% better than average at shutting down defense and 1% better than average at creating offense. Provorov, -3 on offense, +2 on defense. And that means that he is 2% worse than shutting it down and 3% worse at creating offense. So Provorov is seen as more of an offensive guy, or, he's seen as a two-way defenseman, but I think he probably leans a little bit more offensively, even though I think he's probably better defensively when he's used correctly, right? Gavrikov is both better offensively and defensively than Provorov. I guess the question is, who do you want to pay? If the option is to pay Gavrikov more, is he worth it? And for me, yes, immediately. Now, Provorov's contract is definitely, I think it's going to be a topic of conversation right up until July 1st, right? I know that Waddell wants to keep him around. I'm sure the team wants to keep him around. But I guess the thing is going to be, if you give Provorov like 7x7, that feels like a mistake, right? That feels like it's a Damon Severson 2.0 contract. I don't think it's going to age well at all. If you want to give Provorov like 3x3 or 4x4, like, I'd probably be okay with that. That to me feels like the absolute max term or AAV for me anyway. And maybe I'm the outlier there, but that to me is about what he's worth. I know that he was quite good for the Blue Jackets this season. He was awful for the Blue Jackets last season, and I don't think that like 2 seasons is enough of a benchmark to say, well, yes, we should definitely keep him here long term. He's not been great basically his entire career. He was better than average this season, but still not as good as Gavrikov, who has, again, been extremely good defensively his entire career and will offer a smidgen of offense if you need him. Just an ounce. Just a scooch of offense if you need him to. So I guess the question is, do you want Gavrikov's, 20 to 30 points, or do you want Ivan Provorov's, like, potentially 40 to 50 points? But obviously Gavrikov is much better on defense than Provorov. And honestly, I think, again, going back to my kind of contract, again, I'm just throwing numbers at the wall to see what sticks here. But, like, if you can get him for 5x5, like, again, that's probably the upper edge of what I would do. I would be happy with 4x4. Honestly, I'd probably be happy with 5x4, like 5 million for 4 years. I'd probably go as high as 6 million for 3 years with Gavrikov. A little bit of a raise on what he's making now. Brings him to the age of 32, which is just, I believe, probably on the upper edge of getting that one last contract before you can kind of sail off. If you're 32, you can probably get another 3-4 years. That'll take you to 36, 37. And you can sail off back to Russia. But I would quite happily give him 3 or 4 years. I probably wouldn't give him like 6 million for 4 or 5 years, but I would give him 6 million for 3 years if that was, if that was what it took to get Gavrikov. Because again, the Blue Jackets have the cap space, they have the flexibility, especially if they don't re-sign both Provorov and Fabro. Like, there's a world where they don't keep either of them. which I really hope that that's not the world that we live in, because I really, really, really would like to keep Fabro. But for me, Vladislav Gavrikov, and we've talked a little bit about Aaron Ekblad being on the market. Someone mentioned Dmitry Orlov, who I'm going to talk about in another episode probably. Like, there are defensemen out there on the market. I don't know if I can pull the list of UFAs quickly. I probably can, right? If I'm figuring it out, it might be that the UFA machine has broken because the contract. Okay, the UFA settings have broken, so that's fine. But based on preliminary some research that I did a while ago, and then have probably forgotten most of it because welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets. 12 seconds passes and nothing exists anymore. The point I'm making here is Gavrikov is not the flashiest option on the free market, but I think he's the best one. Now, the question becomes, will he sign in Columbus? So we'll talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We are talking all about the Vladislav Gavrikov. I was going to say the defenseman, as if anyone would know what I was talking about there, but just the defenseman. That's it. We're talking about Vladislav Gavrikov, and we've looked at. I have looked into it, and I am happy offering him a contract. I think he's going to be a big improvement on, lots of aspects of this team. My only issue is I believe that he plays on the left side, which is probably the more stacked side, right? So I guess then it comes down to, and this is something we didn't really discuss in the bulk of the episode, is do you get another left defenseman and just play someone on the right? Matejchuk has played a little bit on the right. Gavrikov has played a little bit on the right as well. Do you put those two together and see who's better on the right? But Provorov is a left defenseman, and he played on the right most of the season. So I don't think handedness or whether you play on the right or the left really matters that much to Everson. But that's the only real flaw in this, right? Is will Gavrikov come somewhere and then play on his offside, probably for the next 2 to 3 seasons? Potentially no, but I think that there is, if he leaves LA, looking at teams that need defense, teams that want to upgrade on their defense, if I'm the Sharks, I'm approaching him. I think that might be a pretty safe bet. It's very similar to LA. Obviously, the team is very different, but the lifestyle is probably a little bit chiller, but you've still got the beach is 20 minutes away from San Jose. There are no beaches in San Jose, but the ocean is only 20 minutes over the hill. And the weather is nice. And again, San Jose is a great city. Detroit, I think, is another option. I don't think the chances of him signing there aren't super high, if you ask me. But if you look at Columbus specifically and say, hey, do you think he would want to come back to Columbus? If it was these 3 teams are offering him the same amount of money and term, where does he go? I'd like to think that Columbus is up there. Again, there's a lot of Russians on the team, which I know is important for Russian players. I don't think that it was a big reason why he left, but I've heard stories that Sergei Bobrovsky was unhappy with the amount of Russians in Columbus. I think he wanted to go somewhere where there were more Russians or more Russian speakers, at least, because I believe at the time when he left, it would have been just him and Panarin, who obviously left in free agency, and Gavrikov. I think they were the only Russians on the team. I'm probably forgetting someone really key, but I think that more than most other European nations, I think having Russians on your team is more important. And the Blue Jackets have a ton of Russians, so that's a point in their favor. Second point, I've already talked about this. City is great. He knows that. Familiarity. Knows about half the team. The other half of the team is Russian. And they're an up-and-coming team, right? It feels like, and again, this comes down to what does he want to do? Does he want to win now? Does he want to make money? Like, my guess is he probably wants to win now, but I think if he wants to win now, it's tough to be kind of a mid-pairing defenseman and want to go somewhere to win, right? Because I feel like a lot of places are either looking for that top defenseman or they're looking for a third pairing guy. And the better the team, the better the chances that they're just looking for a third pairing guy, right? So if you are a guy that is good enough to play in the top four, like I think Gavrikov is, then your issue becomes teams that are in a place to win now are generally not looking for top four defensemen, in theory. So then you've got to decide, well, do I stick with LA? They made the playoffs this year. They might make they're probably going to make the playoffs next year unless they have a complete meltdown. But it feels to me like the Kings are starting a decline. I don't think their window is closed, but I think it's starting to think about closing, right? Whereas ostensibly the Blue Jackets window just started opening this season, right? It should be open in a couple of years. It's definitely going to keep opening, knock on wood. Does he want to come to a team that is, poised to maybe not win the cup this year, but take massive steps, be a playoff team this year, be a playoff team next year? I don't think he's at that point where he's going to go cup chasing, but there's an appeal to playing on like a young up and coming team, right? And I think Gavrikov is smart enough to know that. And again, I think Columbus it's a familiar situation. His agent has obviously worked extensively with the Blue Jackets because they have a ton of Russians, as previously mentioned. His agent is Dan Milstein, who I believe represents basically every Russian. And if not every Russian, then near as damn it, right? I think he represents every Russian on the Blue Jackets, if I'm not mistaken. So Milstein, very familiar with the Blue Jackets, probably very familiar with Don Waddell's negotiating style. It seems to me like if Gavrikov wants to come to Columbus, he could just come to Columbus, right? So the question becomes, does he want to come here? And I think the answer is probably more likely than not, yeah, sure. Really depends, I think, again, on what the Blue Jackets do with their own UFAs. Obviously, if they sign Fabro and Provorov, then there's no room for Gavrikov. But if they decide they get to, July 1st, Provorov hasn't extended, Fabro hasn't extended, do they throw a punt at Gavrikov if he's also unsigned in LA? Which again, LA's having a weird one. At the minute, they've got a bunch of guys that they need to re-sign. They've got a brand new GM. We'll see. Players might not want to stay in LA after the 4 consecutive playoff collapses. Gavrikov was only there for 3 of them, but the concept of, honestly, if I had to lose to the Oilers in the playoffs 4 years in a row, I would probably go literally anywhere else, right? So I think there's that as well. But with the new GM, there's no way to know. They might have a brand new coach. Depends on what Ken Holland wants to do, right? I think it's more likely than not that Jim Hiller stays, which is a wild choice based on everything about this postseason. But this is not an episode about the Kings front office and their myriad failings in the postseason. But the short of it is, I would give Gavrikov a not insignificant amount of money to come back. I think he is exactly what this team needs. I think he is an upgrade on Provorov. I think he is the perfect defense partner for Deda Bateychuk, who is young and learning and will learn a lot from Gavrikov. Feels like a real team wins and also player wins situation. Unless Gavrikov wants to go for that long, unless he wants the 7 or 8 year contract, which I don't know that Columbus would give him. Again, there's a bunch of moving parts. If they can get out from under the Severson contract, then all bets are off. But to me, it feels like this really is just the perfect match. And I'm not just saying that because Gavrikov was here. Again, fans are addicted to saying that they want old players on their team back. I really, really, really genuinely think that this is one of the few cases where bringing in a player that used to be here is a good thing and should be considered and will benefit the team more than it will benefit the nostalgia, right? So that's my case. I think we should bring Gavrikov home. I think that would be fun for me. I think that would be fun for the fans. I think that would be fun for the team. etc., etc. So that's all I've got for today. Tomorrow, I think we're going to do another one of these because I'm having fun doing them. I think I'm going to talk about Andrei Kuzmenko potentially, because that was a name that was mentioned in my YouTube comments last week. And let's keep the theme going of stealing all of LA's UFAs. So we're going to talk about him tomorrow. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Blue Sky at JAKOBFORSTER, basically the same as Twitter without the underscore. You can't find the show on Blue Sky yet, but soon, I hope. If you want to email me, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Comments, questions, criticisms, etc. Thank you for listening, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. We are free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. And like I said, tomorrow we'll talk all about Andrei Kuzmenko, what he could bring to the team. And until then, make sure you stay locked on.